One Punch Man chapter 168 is titled Awakening of the Gods, and it's a banger. There's lots of amazing stuff in this chapter that I'll get into, so let's just jump into it. It starts off with Saitama being punched from a distance through one of Garo's portals, then Saitama returning a blow to Garo through the same portal. Garo attempts to get behind Saitama and attack him, but Saitama reacts and they exchange blows. In an instant, Garo opens another portal and attempts to surprise Saitama again, but is surprised to see Saitama isn't where he was, and we see Saitama had jumped into the air and landed on a rock, then jumps back down, mirroring a panel of Garo earlier, and then karate chops Garo's head, similar to how Garo did it to him. Saitama is intentionally copying Garo's moves here on purpose, as Garo points out. And Saitama then asks Garo, "What's wrong? You said you were gonna copy me when I'm serious and surpass me, didn't you? Go ahead and try. Isn't that the whole point of this?" I'd just like to point out that this is clear evidence I was right in my previous chapter review when I said Saitama wasn't going full power and also didn't take any damage. But there's more in my favor later on as well. Garo is confused because he's countering Saitama with just as much power as he's outputting, but Saitama is somehow hitting even harder and he can't keep up. He then realizes he's basically being left behind by Saitama. It then shows a graph of what is presumably the power of Garo and Saitama, and we see Saitama hitting Garo just a little bit harder each time, and his strength keeps exponentially outpacing whatever Garo is copying. Garo realizes that at this rate one of the punches is eventually going to kill him. The chapter then says that even now Saitama was continuing to grow, and then it talks about how no one was able to notice Saitama's rate of growth because no one was ever even remotely on par with his strength, and then that it suddenly began to soar exponentially due to an upsurge of emotion like none he had ever experienced. And now, the only one on a level to be able to observe Saitama's growth was getting completely left behind. And then, there was no longer anybody left to measure what level Saitama's strength had reached. Now, for some reason, these panels are a bit controversial to some people because they seem to think this ruins Saitama, but I'm on the contrary of that opinion. So, in the beginning, this chapter states that Saitama even now was continuing to grow, as in, he wasn't stagnated like people had thought. A lot of people assume that Saitama had basically removed his limiter, was able to grow super strong, and then he stagnated in strength because no one was able to even challenge him. They assumed this because he was talking to King about not being able to get any stronger, that he had essentially gotten to the heavyweight title in boxing with such disparity compared to other fighters that no one would be able to make him better, but this chapter proves the opposite. Saitama has always been growing in strength. In the next panel, it explains that to everyone else it seemed like Saitama was staying the exact same because no one was ever even remotely on par with his strength. No one could see any difference than if he had destroyed a meteor or a mountain, because this dude was clearly just super strong. So, since no one was able to see a difference in day-to-day Saitama, they assumed he had just stagnated, much like a lot of the readers, but in reality he was always growing. The only reason we can clearly see it now is because Garo was straight up copying Saitama's actual power output, as in he was copying Saitama's strength at that very moment he copied it, but Saitama was simply just growing faster than the strength that Garo had copied, so it didn't matter. So Saitama's always getting stronger whether he's fighting monsters, going to sales at the bargain mart, or just lazing around doing nothing. Most likely the in-universe explanation is that by removing his limiter, he simply just never stopped growing, and this is why Saitama from today can beat the Saitama from yesterday in one punch, according to the Virtual Genocide Machine and the audio CDs of One Punch Man. Not only is Saitama always growing, but we can also see that he's not just growing at a constant rate. He literally just exponentially shoots up because of reasons, and a lot of people are trying to figure out what those reasons are. So it says that his strength suddenly began to soar exponentially due to an upsurge of emotion like none he had ever experienced. Some people are taking this to mean that Garo, even though he clearly stands no chance against Saitama in the long run, is at least giving Saitama a challenge, enough to spark growth in him because of the fight being real or as close to real as possible. Personally, I don't really buy this idea because we know that Garo knows that Saitama was completely unfazed the entire fight no matter what he did, and the entire fight it's clear that Saitama's holding back, and this isn't just me saying Saitama was holding back. At the end of the chapter, Saitama admits he was pulling his punches, 1 because he's a hero, and 2 because he made a promise to that kid not to kill Garo. I also called this in my last chapter review video, and I was right about that. Because Saitama can clearly end the fight whenever he wants to, but is choosing not to get it out of his system, and to teach Garo a lesson. Saitama also doesn't say to Garo, finding a way back to Earth can come after I kill you. He specifically says it can come after I beat the shit out of you, meaning Saitama intends to take Garo alive, which is why Saitama is purposely trying not to kill Garo, even if he is tossing him around a little bit to teach him a lesson. And also he promised Tereo not to kill Garo. But yeah, so we know Saitama's been holding back, clearly is not going at max power because he quite literally does not have a max power as shown by this chapter. He simply doesn't have a limit. There is no maximum to his power, which in theory makes him infinitely powerful, but a lot of people are arguing about the differences between limitless and infinite strength. And I understand the distinction, but for the sake of conversation, I'll say for all intents and purposes, Saitama's strength is limitless and theoretically infinite given the information of this chapter. So yeah, Garo isn't really giving Saitama a real fight because Saitama isn't struggling whatsoever with Garo, and Garo knows it. No matter what Garo hits Saitama with, he can tank it easily and hit back harder. I mean, it's literally said in the chapter. Also, Saitama's not going at max power again because he's literally hitting harder than he was before, and he's still pulling his punches as to not kill Garo. So all the people who thought Garo damaged Saitama or was giving him a fight, you're just wrong. Saitama took no damage this entire fight, and I've been calling that since day one. Another idea people have is that this graph is supposed to showcase what Garo thinks is happening. Although I understand where they're coming from, I don't think that's the case. This seems to be like a narrator or the story itself telling us what's happening. Usually Garo's thoughts about something are clearly written out in a specific type text to show us his thoughts, so I don't think that's what's happening here. More possibilities are in the same vein of it either being the thoughts of a character or showcasing an easy graph to give us an easy way to understand what's happening, but not a literal one-to-one of what is actually going on in the chapter. There is also the case to be made that Saitama is not getting stronger because Garo is giving him a real fight, because it specifically uses the words upsurge of an emotion like none he had ever experienced. And we know that Saitama knows what the feeling of a real fight is actually like. Of course, you could argue that maybe it's just been so long that he's forgotten, but I don't still think it's a real fight to Saitama, not just because of the specific word choice or just because he's holding back, even though those are valid reasons. I think it's specifically because of the panel they chose to show right before the emotions are discussed, which is Saitama holding Genos' core/heart. Clearly Genos means something to Saitama, and later on we even get a scene of Saitama telling Garo how they parallel, not because they're just clinging on to someone for support, but because they did genuinely want to save them and care about them. Saitama's always been a loner, even as a kid. He's never really had any close connections since before meeting Genos, and he clearly cares about Genos and his well-being. That's why Saitama's main priority before every fight is seeing if Genos is okay or saving other people. When he first stared down Garo, he ran past Garo to Genos just to see how he was doing, and gave him props for how well he did and told him that it was his heart that got stronger, the thing that keeps him alive and is literally what Saitama is now holding on to the entire fight with Garo. The same way Garo wanted Tereo to stay far away from him and keep him out of harm's way, but couldn't, and the way Saitama wanted to save Genos but didn't, shows how much Saitama blames himself more than Garo for killing Genos. So the fact that they chose this panel signifies that the emotion Saitama was feeling was one of loss, grief, and regret, something he's never really experienced since he's been on his own since forever. The only person we've ever seen him interact with the most from the beginning is Genos, someone who he genuinely cares about and someone who he failed to save. That is the emotion I think Saitama had never experienced, and that's what pushed him up. My thoughts on this is a mix of that feeling of loss and also the feeling of Saitama simply just choosing to output whatever amount of strength he wants to and is purely getting stronger or just tapping into more of his infinite stamina / possibly infinite strength more and more simply because he wants to. But it's also showing us exactly what I said in my first couple seconds on my very first video on One Punch Man 4 years ago. The entire premise of One Punch Man is that Saitama is strong enough to one punch anyone and anything. The reasoning for that is followed by the argument that no one is stronger than Saitama, therefore he one-punches everything. The entire point of One Punch Man is that Saitama is stronger than everyone else, and so strong that he can one-punch anyone he faces. A lot of people took issue with this and told me I was wrong because they incorrectly assumed that Saitama had stagnated in growth, and or that he's just much stronger than everyone else in his verse, so that means that he one-punches everyone, because they either haven't or can't reach the same level of strength he gained. However, as we see in this chapter, even if someone were to match Saitama and give the output of strength of what he's outputting and hit him with it, it simply just doesn't damage him, because it seems his durability is just basically infinite. But that's just another point. And also because he simply outpaces the strength of whatever the person attacking him does. And a couple of people are bringing up the point of, well, if Saitama is at this point and he's always growing, then doesn't that mean if someone is stronger than Saitama right here, then they would be able to beat Saitama? No. In my opinion, this just cements the canonical reason of One Punch Man's existence in an easy to digest way. Saitama is stronger than everyone. Saitama throughout the fight, as seen on this graph, was always stronger than Garo, no matter at what point. There was never a point, even after Garo received the power of God, that Garo was stronger than Saitama. Saitama, when faced with someone who was approaching his strength, literally just magically grew stronger than that person, to the point wherein he could potentially one-punch them, as seen with how far above Saitama got, and to the point that Garo could no longer keep up with them anymore. So if Saitama is here and someone starts here, then Saitama would just instantly be here by the time that person attacked, because his growth in the chart literally just scaled to be higher than Garo for no other reason than 1. He wanted to, 2. The plot needed him to, and 3. He's Saitama. Any person who goes against Saitama, no matter how strong, will have this exact same thing happen to them, infinitely, until they can't keep up anymore. They might approach his strength, but then he'll grow strong enough to one-punch them anyway, so it doesn't matter. Also, a totally new possibility, but maybe Saitama's actual power is canonically to be strong enough to beat anyone in one punch. Like, not that he's stronger than everybody and can do it, but that literally his power is simply to be stronger than anyone and one punch them. So if someone matches him, he's instantly stronger like here, or if someone is above him, he's instantly stronger like here. Crablante became a crab because he ate too much crab, and that was also told to us at the same moment that Saitama exclaimed he wanted to be strong enough to send opponents flying with one punch. So, just a possibility that his literal power is to one punch everything. But those are my thoughts on the most controversial part of the chapter. What did you guys think of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. So then, Saitama uses Serious Sneeze and blows away Jupiter and sends him and Garo flying away, and Garo teleports back to where Earth is. It should also be mentioned that Saitama literally so casually grabbed Garo's hand here as to show just how strong he had gotten. That's why I'm safely assuming that Saitama could one-punch Garo at literally any moment if he really wanted to. Saitama caught up with Garo, surprises him, and explains that he had a stomach cold so he used a normal fart, sadly not serious fart, to catch up with Garo, and then punches him back down to Earth, and then breaks the mode Saitama literally out of Garo. And Garo asked why Saitama isn't killing him, and Saitama explains that compared to the fact that things don't always turn out right, like King, or the fact that he's not flashy or cool looking, like how Garo's costume changes were, he doesn't really feel like he's cut out for all that, and that he's not killing Garo because 1, he is a hero, and also that it was Tereo's final request that Saitama stop Garo without killing him. Garo sees that his radiation killed Tereo, and he runs away screaming, and Saitama tells Garo that he's been really weird since he fell from the sky. And they have their moment of understanding of what they both have lost, and Garo finally asks Saitama for a favor. Garo then tells Saitama to copy his copying martial arts, and tells Saitama that since he's so powerful, then he should be able to copy his technique and surpass them even further. So then, Garo tells Saitama to watch closely, and that if anyone can master the power of God without taking his hand, it's him. God then tells Garo silence and that he's taking his power back, and starts to crumble Garo from the feet up. Saitama tastes salt, and some people are speculating that this is a reference to Lot's wife in the Bible, specifically Genesis 19, which tells the story of 2 angels arriving in Sodom, a biblical city that was destroyed by God for their wickedness. The angels tell Lot and his family to flee, and to not look behind you at the destruction of the city, and while fleeing, Lot's wife turned around and was turned into a pillar of salt. This seems to be like what is happening to Garo. So this seems to be giving God some more fuel to being an even more powerful being, if he's more so a depiction of the capital G God and not just a lower level lowercase g God. Garo tells Saitama to concentrate, and they both imagine their own inner universes, or whatever the hell that means. And Garo tells Saitama to go back and defeat that ominous future to keep it from ever happening, and then Garo turns to a pillar of whatever we can assume is salt or stone. Saitama then begins traveling backwards in time, and he compliments Garo on his martial arts, which like, bruh, how is a gamma ray burst and time travel considered martial arts? You know what, not important. So then, Saitama punches through time and then takes out Garo right after he blew him away with the gamma ray burst. And then Saitama reverses causality, putting him above time, and the reader is told that this is completely unavoidable, and that it took not 1 punch, but 0 punches to finish the battle. So Saitama is so strong he can not only time travel, punch through time, but can end a fight in 0 punches before it ever happened. So this makes Saitama above time, 4 to 5D casually, able to warp reality, and 0 punch everybody. Saitama easily beats Goku. Everyone sees naked Saitama beat Garo, and Genos, now alive because he was never killed, sees Saitama. We see Garo losing his god power as his face shell thing was shattered, and then Saitama is pulled back into his old body and they both fuse. Saitama is confused, sees that he's holding Genos' core, and also that his dick is out, and he gets headbutted by Genos, who's happy to see him. And Saitama is happy to see him too. Very much alive. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter review video. Sorry that it took me so long to put this out. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts about anything you'd like me to talk about from this chapter. There was a lot, and I tried to cover everything. I felt like there were a lot of highlights and a lot of questions, but hopefully I could give you some answers, or at least my thoughts on it. And anyway, I guess I'll see you all next time.